Hey everybody, welcome to the second PLC for high school dance for April. I am Ellen Jody, and the dance director at Brookwood High School in Gwinnett County. Hope you are all doing well and hanging in there. It's springtime, so if you are in the process of putting your spring show together, whether that be virtual or in person, I hope the process is going smooth. I know it's a lot of work. So if you're in that process, Maynard, if you are done with your spring show, I hope you are able to relax a bit and you are counting down the days until this crazy year is over. My spring show is coming up the first week of May, so I'm lucky enough to be able to do it in the theater with all the COVID precautions, masks, and I only have 1/5 of my audience. We have about a 500-seat theater, so I'm allowed 95 people per show. So we are doing 5 shows to try to make up for some lost time and so we can accommodate families and friends in our community. So it'll be lots of work, but as you know, it's always worth it in the end. Today's webinar will be talking about formative and summative assessments a little bit more in depth than I did in the last webinar about assessment. We focused on diagnostic and formative in that one, and then we'll just talk about some best practices. So that is our presentation for today. Formative assessment definition. What is a formative assessment? This is an in-process evaluation of a student's progress. Are the dancers understanding the content? What do they need to understand the content? Can we move on, or do we need to continue practicing what we are doing right now? So these are the basic things for formative assessment. For us in dance class, we are continuously using formative assessment. Most of the time it's informal. The way a technique class goes, it's going to be an informal formative assessment. In your dance technique classes, they happen in real time. So in practicing a contraction, you adjust a student's shoulders so they're over her hips. You ask a student to articulate through the metatarsal in a tendu instead of just taking the foot out and tapping the toe on the floor. You remind a student that there must be space between the ears and the shoulders. So these are all our informal assessments that we do all the time continuously in dance class. You are continuously identifying where there is a gap in the understanding, and then you are addressing it in real time. Hopefully your dancer understands, number one, how to make the bodily adjustment, the correction that you're giving them, and then number two, of course, remembers the correction for next time. So these informal formative assessments allow us to adjust instruction as needed. So maybe you were ready to practice a pirouette with your Dance 1 class. They've learned the preparation, they've learned the passe, they've learned about keeping their spine nice and straight. But you come into class today and a lot of them are just not embodying the concept of a straight spine with a high passe. So, you just continue to work on the preparation and the passe hold rather than moving on to the actual turn. So this kind of thing also allows us to individualize and differentiate instruction. So you could have a couple kids in the class who are well ready to move on to the single pirouette. So in that case, you can take a moment and, demonstrate and show them, and then have them work on that while the other half of the class, or a third of the class or whatever, continues to work on their passe preparation. And of course, this is just, again, talking about technique for our formative assessment. So I think that's where formative assessment lives in the dance classroom. It's ongoing, it's constant. Yeah, in those first couple weeks that we're with our students, we're using that diagnostic, but then we're continuously using the formative assessment as we go through our technique classes and our choreography classes, or when the kids are learning choreography. You're constantly, you're making those, you're seeing where there's a problem and you're making the adjustments. So that is formative assessment. All right, formative assessment uses. So the assessment feedback is known to promote student learning not only measure it. So the feedback that you're giving them is promoting their learning, not just letting you know how much they know. You are constantly promoting their learning. These formative assessments and feedback can take many forms and should be seen as an integral part of the dance classroom. Not only should feedback come from us, the teacher, but it should come from self-assessment or peer assessment, especially when it is constructive and hyper-focused. The definitions of self and peer assessment here, what I'm using, are cited from the Journal of Dance Education article named Formative Assessment in Dance Education. I will put this PDF version in the discussion thread. It's a pretty good article. So this is a quote. Self-assessment is a process during which students critique their own work according to explicitly stated expectations, usually in the form of goals or criteria, and then revise and improve their work. So they're setting their own goals, they're figuring out where they need to do the work, and then they're revising and improving the self-assessment. Peer assessment, and this is again another quote from the article, peer assessment or peer feedback is when students comment on each other's work. And I know we've all used peer assessment, partners in class. So it's a little bit more than just students commenting on each other's work, but I thought that was a good quote. So I think a lot of us dance teachers tend to give general corrections and feedback. We individualize our instruction for our students. However, we may focus on a few things and offer the same language when giving feedback. And I'm actually assessing my own assessments as I go through this. And I'm thinking, like, I have go-to corrections for dancers. And how am I currently working? I think a lot of us dance teachers tend to give general corrections and feedback. We individualize our instruction for the students. However, we may tend to focus on a few things as we go through our classes and offer the same language when giving feedback. So I am thinking about my own instruction, and I have go-to corrections that I have. I'm constantly saying shoulders over hips, head-tail connection. And now, of course, the dancers know what that means and what I mean by it. But I think, in terms of language, I could be a lot more varied and, just have a lot more words and fruitful feedback for them when I say that and give them those corrections. So I'm currently working on updating and varying my language when giving my feedback. So that's something to think about. I'm also in the process of getting my master's in dance ed. I think I've mentioned that before. And I'm doing a lot of reading of research articles. Another article I found in the Journal of Dance Education called Assessment in the High School Technique Class, Creating Thinking Dancers, talks about changing the dynamic of the traditional dance class. Right now, it's the teacher, I am the master, I have all the knowledge, and I am imparting it to you, and you are standing in my dance class facing me at the mirror. You are silent, and you are trying to take in everything I'm doing and emulate what I'm doing. So maybe we need to think about taking that traditional setting and making it a little more student learning friendly. So rather than that structure, giving the students the power to create their own learning in class and rehearsal by collaborating with them and agreeing upon criteria that is based on, quote from this article, personal, cultural, and discipline-specific values. So when we're talking about assessment, you're usually going to have a rubric. So what about having the students create most of the rubrics for your class for themselves? You can, for those self-assessments, of course, but then even for your class, you can have a whole class sit down and make a rubric. So this can happen with questioning, discussions, and collaboration with your dancers to create the criteria or the rubric for your formative assessments. So in this way, you may have some general things you will assess, but you can very much differentiate and individualize instruction for each dancer. So I'm really getting into having the dancers create rubrics for the things that we're doing. Even the class, even the dance technique class. What do you want to work on? They can have their own self-assessment rubric, that I want to work on my battement, I want to work on a pirouette, but the other dancer over here wants to work on flexibility and stamina. So I think there's something in that, in letting them take control of what they're learning in that way. So using peer assessment, students can focus on very specific items on the rubric, maybe only 1 or 2 items, while watching her peer execute the phrasing or technique. So getting back to talking about peer assessment, this will allow students to focus on very specific items on the rubric, so maybe only 1 or 2 items, while watching a peer execute either a technique exercise or a phrase. Then the student watching offers a comment about the specific item, and the doer tries again and integrates the feedback. Then they reverse roles, of course. Then the pair can reflect together on what worked or what did not work. And then this method of assessment also allows you, the teacher, to just walk around the room and listen, and even get feedback from just listening to the kids talk to each other. So peer assessment is good. I have used this form for a bunch of things, especially, like when we're talking about that technique, the pirouettes or a battement, and really, like, I've had the doer who's doing the pirouette, stand in front of the person and have the other person that was watching literally sit on the floor, close, of course, not to hit each other, and just like take in everything, try to like watch different things and have them do it maybe a couple times, have the watcher take some mental notes, and then, give the feedback. So I've used it for that in different ways for technique. And then getting back to the self-assessment, students will, again, be focused on a very specific item, and maybe this is an agreed upon rubric that you have made with the student. And I think, a really good way to do this is video. We have our phones that the kids can grab and record themselves doing a phrase or, again, a technique exercise, and then they can use the rubric to assess themselves performing either the phrase or the technique exercise. So, like I said, again, formative assessment is basically what we do throughout a technique class. We do it in real time. We do it constantly. We are constantly using formative assessment in our dance classes. And then we can also use a self-assessment and peer assessment, as well as us doing the assessment while we're teaching. All right. Moving on to talk about summative assessment. What is summative assessment in dance? This is our high-stakes evaluation of student learning at the end of a unit, project, or performance. And now we're asking the questions, what is the student learning outcome? What have they gotten? Have you taken them from point A to point B, and now we're solid at point B? And now we know for the next year, the next semester, we can move on to that point C. Were your goals reached? Did the stated goals that you guys decided on, did you get there? So that's what that summative assessment is going to be. I'm guessing that for most of us, our summative assessment is going to be our final performance, or the culmination of what the students have learned in a unit or at the end of a semester. I know in my county, generally us dance teachers use our end of semester performance as the summative assessment. Or, well, on top of that, they also do an in-class performance final of a dance phrase or culmination of dance technique that has been learned throughout the semester. Here in our county, we also have a written summative final that covers the dance history and anatomy that we have done during the semester. So I've got a written and performance summative assessment. So I've got the performance that we do, and then I've got the in-class final technique assessment, and then I've got the written assessment, which is generally, the written assessment is usually just a multiple choice. Purpose of the summative assessment, and we talked about that, is to assess specific learning goals and objectives of a project unit, or for us in dance, probably a performance. So as I'm doing this and as I was creating the webinar, I was just thinking, I was assessing my own ways of doing this in the back of my head. So I usually give a grade, well, a bunch of grades in my grade book for show week. Each rehearsal that we have, each show warm-up, and each performance of the week is a grade. Then generally I make the last performance and the last warm-up the summative grades. So I will average the regular grades from the week, from that whole week, and then put that number in for the summative grade. However, creating a dance show, running lights and sound, dealing with costumes, hair, makeup, and calling the show doesn't lend itself to accurately filling out a rubric for each student. So there would be no way. I just can imagine myself up in the light booth with the headphones, like flipping through rubrics. No, it will never happen. Never has happened, never will. So for that assessment, so most of what I assess for this grade tends to be a cumulative assessment of being a team player, basically. So this is how I create the rubric for the show. So I do use the performing standard, understand and model dance etiquette as a classroom participant, performer, and observer. So for this summative assessment, I'm not looking at did you do all the steps in the dance? Did you mess up or miss something? Did you follow a pirouette? It didn't. So I don't take any of that into consideration because that would be the rubric that I could never keep up with. But under the performing strand, a couple of it is demonstrate attentiveness, focus, concentration, initiative, self-discipline when performing in the dance environment or participating, demonstrate concentration and focus, that was hard to say, and help maintain a respectful performance environment for others, exhibit ability to perform with focus and concentration, and attend rehearsals and classes in prep for performances, and then exhibit initiative in modeling appropriate behaviors and skills as an audience member, dance observer, and understand the roles of an arts patron. So basically my whole summative grade for my dance show is that standard. I take into consideration, are you on time? Do you have your hair the way it's supposed to do? You have your makeup the way it's supposed to be? The only thing that I will take off points for that goes against the rubric for the performance would be missing a cue. If a dancer is supposed to go out on, you know what I mean, they miss their cue and they're not on stage. Because that goes along with the maintain a respectful performance environment for others. So you've got to know what you're doing and when you need to be on stage. So generally speaking, I can figure that out when I'm in the light booth watching the show, because you're like, I know there's supposed to be 5 dancers on that stage, but right now I only see 4. So I do that. But other than that, that's what I grade on my performance. I use that performing standard, understand and model dance etiquette as a classroom participant, performer, and observer. These are pretty wide open standards, so you could really delve in there and get really hyper focused if that's what you intended to do. Anyway, so since we just don't want to assess on that standard, this is why I do a technique summative assessment and a choreographic summative assessment. And I said I do the written assessment. So then we'll come in to the dance studio. This will be before the show. I'll assess them with the rubric. And I think I put some rubrics up there for the last webinar. I'll assess them in technique class, and then I'll do an assessment with the choreo. I'll throw out a really quick combo and see how they pick it up and that kind of thing. So we hit a lot of the strands with the performing dance technique and performance and choreo. So that's how I do my summative assessments. All right, best practices for assessments in the dance classroom. I say your assessments and rubrics should, obviously, be created from the standards. So these are the stated goals from the Georgia Standards of Excellence. The standards are pretty open, and I just said that. The standards are pretty open and you could pretty much cover a lot in a dance class. So I know we're all different dancers. We all have different backgrounds in dance, but our standards are pretty wide open to where you can glean a lot of things and a lot of focus and a lot of rubrics and assessments from those standards for your classes. Be fair and balanced. Your assessments and rubrics should be fair. Make sure they are culturally relevant and take into consideration all students that you have in front of you. They should cover specific goals, of course, we just said. While the Georgia Standards of Excellence are open and allow you to cover a wide range of things, just make sure each assessment covers a specific stated goal. And then I think I'm getting more and more into this, mostly be student generated. With those, formative assessments, the diagnostic assessments can be also, but I think a lot of those formative assessments can really be student generated. Even your summative assessments, with those technique and choreography assessments, they can help create them. I'm even thinking as I'm sitting here, I might actually have them create the rubric for the show and see what they come up with, so I can just see what's going on in their heads when they're thinking about the dance show. However, it will be interesting because my Dance 1 students haven't really ever done a show in the theater with me yet. And I've had them all year. We did that show on the track and the football field. So this will be a whole different experience. Being in the theater, as I don't need to tell you, is a whole different dance etiquette experience than being on a football field for a dance show. So we'll see what happens. I did want to put this in here about the Teacher Keys Effectiveness System, the TKES. So it's pretty handy. You can go through all these things. And I know, and I'll actually put the standards 5 and 6 on assessments. I'll put them in the discussion as well. Here's what the standard 5 said about assessment strategies. So assessment can facilitate instruction and learning in many ways, including providing diagnostic information regarding students' mental readiness for new content, providing formative and summative information needed to monitor student progress and adjust instruction, keeping your students motivated, holding them accountable, and then providing opportunities to re-expose students to content, and then helping them retain and transfer what they've learned. Standard 6, teachers who monitored their students' progress on a regular basis, they affected greater student achievement. They had more improvement in instructional structure. Their pedagogical decisions reflected greater realism and responsiveness to student progress, and I think that's a really important point. And then their students were more knowledgeable about their own learning and conscious of learning goals and progress, and I think that's another important one as well. We really need to hand learning over to our students. And I think dance lends itself to that, actually, because we're asking them to be creative and create. So that right there hands over the learning to them. Okay, I'm going to go out of my presentation just to show you for a minute. So don't forget, there are a ton of lessons and assessments and rubrics on the Godot website. So I'm going to go out of my presentation. I'm going to look up. That's all you have to look up. And then we go right here. And a wealth of information pops up. So you scroll down here. There's all kinds of stuff. There's talking about our PLC, which I'm creating for you right now. Once you come down here, there's all kinds of lessons. If you come down here, dance instructional frameworks. These were written in the summer of 2019. So you literally have classical and contemporary partnering. You have high school dance, which is High School Dance 1, and then High School Dance for Theater, which is a pretty cool course, and then Modern Dance, and then World Dance Forms. I wrote the Modern Dance high school one, and so there are rubrics, there are worksheets, there's vocabulary, there's PowerPoint resources, so there's all kinds of stuff in there. I know I'm going a little off assessment topic, but do not forget that we have this. And then, of course, do not forget that you have the PLC, the high school dance PLC. All right, so there is our formative and summative assessments and best practices for assessments in the dance classroom. I hope to start a discussion with you soon. All right.